Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are tearing into the brutal, completely counterintuitive, and honestly, utterly fascinating world of entrepreneurship. We're chucking out that conventional wisdom that tells you to play it safe, and instead, we're cracking open the Rebel playbook. We're going to look at a mix of real-world data, hardcore startup experiences, and a pretty wild fictional narrative that perfectly captures the extreme highs and the devastating lows of building a massive empire totally from scratch. So picture this for a second. You roll up to the gleaming headquarters of a billion-dollar tech company, the very one you built with your own two hands from a rundown garage. Thousands of employees are buzzing away inside, but as you walk up to those front glass doors, your own security team steps right in front of you. "I'm sorry, sir. You can't enter this building." You swipe your executive access card and it just flashes red. Access denied. No way, right? Well, this is actually the dramatic climax of the fictional story of tech billionaire Ethan Carter, a guy who literally survived on instant noodles to build a titan of artificial intelligence, only to find himself locked out of his own life's work. It forces us to ask a pretty terrifying question, right? How in the world does a founder go from having absolutely nothing to building a billion-dollar empire to being ousted by the very board they appointed? Today, we're using Ethan Carter's story, right alongside real-world insights from the AI Founder Field Manual and actual living, breathing founders to unpack the sheer, unfiltered chaos of the entrepreneurial journey. Which brings us to Section 1, the Rebel Founder's Reality. Because, let's face it, the real world of modern entrepreneurship is a whole different beast than the comfortable advice you get in a textbook. $12. That is literally all our guy Ethan Carter had in his pocket when he started his journey. Living in a government shelter, everyone basically told him he was going to fail. But he just refused to accept that. He delivered newspapers, he fixed up all bicycles, he practically lived in the library reading biographies. The core takeaway here: your current situation never, ever determines your future success. Failure is just a lesson preparing you for tomorrow. But, even when you start building, the road is completely unforgiving. Just look at a real-world example from Juan Andrade, the founder of the fintech startup Rebank. Juan applied to the super prestigious Y Combinator Accelerator and got hit with a devastating no. He described it as an absolute gut punch. Everything leading up to it felt like this epic, rocky training montage, and suddenly they were just flat on the mat. But much like Ethan Carter, Juan didn't stop. He and his co-founder used that rejection to double down, build some real traction, and secure their licenses. When they applied a second time, boom, they got in.
All right, that takes us into Section 2, start with the pain. Because way too often, ambitious engineers build flashy tech first and just kind of pray for an audience leader.
And this brilliantly illustrates the difference. A Rebel founder doesn't build a massive generalized machine right out of the gate. They pinpoint a very specific pain. Look at a company like Runway ML. They didn't start by launching a giant do-it-all AI video engine. Nope, they started by solving a very narrow, incredibly tedious problem for creatives: manual video editing. By automating a process that used to take days, they proved their niche was actually valuable, eventually raising a $35 million Series B to leapfrog an entire industry. So if you want to break the mold yourself, you've got some specific action steps to hit. Talk to your users first, build a minimum solution, and validate early and often. Think back to our fictional founder, Ethan Carter. He didn't start off by dreaming up some massive enterprise software suite. He simply stood in a tiny coffee shop, watched the owner struggling to manage orders and accounting all at the exact same time, and realized, hey, I can build a simple digital tool to fix that specific headache. And that builds perfectly into Section 3, fund your own float. This is all about leveraging customer cash instead of constantly begging venture capitalists for checks. 400,000. That is the absolutely staggering number of paid reservations Tesla scooped up for the Model 3 by April 2016, which was long before the car was actually in production. At $1,000 a pop, customers essentially fronted over $400 million just to fund the development. Now, in the software or AI world, you can do this through paid pilots, early access subscriptions, or even discounted lifetime access. The point is, let your most dedicated customers pay you upfront to finish your product. Now, when you don't have that kind of upfront cash, you've got to adopt a beg, borrow, but whatever you do, don't steal mindset. Take Hugging Face, for example. Even as a multi-billion-dollar company, they deeply understand the power of shared resources, famously donating $10 million in GPU computing to small startups. As a Rebel founder, you use open source code, you hunt down cloud credits, and you leverage strategic partnerships to keep your overhead sitting practically at zero. Of course, moving at that kind of breakneck speed requires a highly controversial mindset. So, Section 4, act without asking permission. Because when you look at truly disruptive companies, they almost never wait around for the rulebook to be written. Think about it. Do you halt your progress just because regulations are a bit murky? Or do you launch first and adapt later? Uber expanded globally despite intense local legal hurdles everywhere they went, making themselves a total household name before the laws could even catch their breath. And we are seeing this exact same thing right now with early generative AI startups. They launch the models first, and they figure out the intellectual property and safety concerns later. They move fast, they define the market, and they adjust when regulators inevitably react. And this kind of speed requires a hardcore yes we can attitude, even and especially when you have no idea what you're doing. Remember Juan Andrade from Rebank? With absolutely zero background in marketing, his team didn't go out and hire some wildly expensive agency. They simply said, yes, we can figure this out, and they churned out over 150 TikTok videos just to find their brand voice through sheer, unapologetic trial and error. They embraced the messy process to figure out what their audience actually cared about. But, what happens when all that crazy hustle actually works? Well, we hit Section 5, the cost of scaling. Because as Juan Andrade points out, early on in Step 1, having a basic bookkeeper is totally fine. But hypergrowth? That eventually forces you to establish Step 2, hiring a highly experienced CFO to come in and lock down all the chaos you just spent years creating. So, the crucial point is this new corporate mandate: control but verify. See, early founders, they just want to spend, build, and conquer the world. A CFO comes in to slap a leash on that chaos. But, as our fictional story is about to show us, bringing in those heavy-hitting executives introduces entirely new, massive dangers. Which brings us right back to Ethan Carter. As his company expanded globally, he brought in incredibly smart, polished executives, specifically his CFO, Richard Lawson, and COO, Victoria Hale. He trusted them like family. But when Ethan had to step away for a mandatory heart surgery, Richard and Victoria secretly went behind his back and convinced the board that Ethan was no longer fit to lead. They weaponized the very financial and operational controls he hired them to implement, effectively locking him out of the empire he built from a garage. It is a really stark reminder of the dark side of corporate scaling. Surviving all of these betrayals and the sheer pressure exacts a seriously heavy personal toll. Bringing us to our final section, Section 6, burn the balance. Because stepping into the founder role means completely losing that comforting identity of being a standard 9-to-5 employee. Suddenly, the responsibility is absolute, and it's always on you. Juan Andre realized that managing this level of psychological pressure required some pretty extreme experimentation with his daily routine just to decompress. For him, that meant sitting in a blistering hot sauna every single day, essentially baking himself in a little wooden box just to reset his nervous system so he could handle the crushing anxiety of running a company. And Juan offers this incredibly harsh but honestly refreshing reality check on the whole situation. He says outright, you shouldn't have a work-life balance. During hypergrowth, striving for perfect balance is just a total myth. Achieving greatness often means sacrificing time with your friends, your family, your romantic partners. It demands periods of intense, completely unbalanced dedication. It's really not pretty, but it's the absolute truth of the Rebel playbook. So, we've seen it all today. The $12 beginnings, the gut punch rejections, the absolute necessity of solving real pain, aggressive expansion, boardroom betrayals, and the total sacrifice of work-life balance. Leaving you to ponder all of this, I just have one final question to ask. Are you ready to endure the chaos and break the rules to build something truly massive, or will you just follow the crowd? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you on the next one.